Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the True Scary Stories compilation. Story 1. The Phantom Correspondence. It was a dreary autumn evening when I received the first email. The sky was overcast, casting a melancholic pallor over the house, and the wind howled like a distant wolf mourning its lost pack. I had just finished a long day at the library, where I worked as a curator of rare books. The past 5 years had been a haze of routine and sorrow, ever since my husband, Daniel, vanished without a trace. The email arrived in my inbox with a soft chime. My heart stopped when I saw the sender, Daniel. The subject line read, "Today's Adventures." With trembling hands, I opened the message. The email was written in Daniel's familiar, precise style, describing his day in meticulous detail: breakfast at our favorite cafe, a stroll in the park, and a visit to the old bookstore we both loved. "Hello, love. This morning, I had the usual at Café Le Monde. The barista still remembers our orders, your cappuccino with a dash of cinnamon and my black coffee with a hint of sugar. It feels strange without you here. I miss our morning rituals." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Daniel had been missing for 5 years. There had been no word, no sign of him, despite the relentless search efforts. And now, out of the blue, an email. It felt like a cruel joke, but deep down, a part of me clung to the hope that it was real. I hit reply, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. What could I possibly say? How could I convey the mix of fear, hope, and confusion swirling within me? Finally, I typed, "Daniel, is it really you? Where have you been?" and hit send. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the email over and over in my mind. Was it a hacker? A cruel prank by someone who knew too much? Or was it truly Daniel, reaching out from some unknown place? The house, usually a comforting sanctuary, felt oppressive and filled with shadows that seemed to whisper secrets I couldn't decipher. The next morning, another email awaited me. This time, Daniel described a visit to the old lighthouse by the coast. I walked up the winding stairs, each step echoing with memories of our visits. The view from the top is as breathtaking as ever. I wish you were here with me, holding my hand. I decided to investigate. I took a leave of absence from work and drove to the lighthouse. The place was deserted, just as it had been since it was decommissioned years ago. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. I wandered through the dusty rooms, the air thick with nostalgia and the scent of salt water. There were no signs of Daniel, but the feeling that he had been there recently was palpable. As I stood at the top of the lighthouse, looking out over the churning sea, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was as if Daniel's presence lingered in the air, a ghostly echo of the man I loved. The questions multiplied in my mind. If he was alive, where had he been all these years? And why was he reaching out now, through emails that seemed to chronicle an ordinary life? The days turned into a blur as the emails continued to arrive. Each one detailed a new aspect of Daniel's daily routine, mundane and yet deeply personal. His words were filled with longing, as if he were trapped in some parallel existence, desperate to reconnect. But there was something else, a subtle undercurrent of fear that seeped through his carefully chosen words. One night, as I read his latest email describing a walk through the old cemetery where we used to picnic, I felt a presence behind me. I turned sharply, but there was no one there. Just the flickering shadows cast by the dim lamp. A sense of dread settled over me. Something was terribly wrong, and I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. Days turned into weeks, and the emails from Daniel continued to arrive with unnerving regularity. Each one seemed to pull me deeper into a labyrinth of memories and emotions. The emails were both a lifeline and a torment, rekindling the love I had thought lost forever, while simultaneously deepening the mystery of his disappearance. One afternoon, I received an email that made my blood run cold. "I saw you today, at the library," Daniel wrote. "You look so beautiful, lost in your thoughts. I wanted to reach out and touch you, but I couldn't. Not yet." The very idea that he could see me, could be watching me sent shivers down my spine. I looked around the library, but everything appeared normal. My colleagues were engrossed in their tasks, and the patrons were quietly browsing the shelves. I decided to confide in my best friend, Clara. She had been a rock for me during Daniel's disappearance and the subsequent years of uncertainty. Over a cup of tea in my kitchen, I showed her the emails. Clara read them in silence, her face a mask of concentration. Finally, she looked up, her eyes filled with concern. "This is eerie, Laura," she said. "I don't know who could be doing this or how they know so much, but it's not natural. You need to be careful." Clara's words echoed in my mind as I continued to receive the emails. Each one seemed to draw me further into a reality where Daniel was both present and absent, alive yet unreachable. The emails described places we had been, things we had done, but always with a strange, otherworldly twist. It was as if Daniel were moving through a shadow version of our world. One evening, after a particularly unsettling email describing a dinner he had prepared for us, I noticed something odd. The house, which had felt empty and devoid of life since Daniel's disappearance, now seemed to hum with an unfamiliar energy. I heard faint footsteps in the hallway, the creak of a floorboard, and once, I was sure I saw a fleeting shadow pass by the living room door. The next morning, I found an old, dusty photo album on the kitchen table. I hadn't seen it in years. It was filled with pictures of Daniel and me, documenting our lives together. But there was one photo that stood out, a picture of us at the old cemetery. I didn't remember taking it. In the background, partially obscured by a tree, was a figure watching us. It was Daniel, but with a look of anguish on his face. Terrified yet resolute, I decided to dig deeper. I revisited places from the emails, searching for clues. Each location felt imbued with Daniel's presence, but there were no concrete signs, only an overwhelming sense of loss and longing. I spoke to the cafe owner, the park gardener, the bookstore clerk. No one had seen Daniel, but they all remembered us vividly. Then, one night, I received an email that changed everything. "I'm trapped, Laura. Help me. Find the mirror." The message was short, but it carried a weight that crushed my heart. What mirror? Where was it? I frantically searched the house, looking for anything that could be the key to this cryptic message. In the attic, amidst the forgotten relics of our past, I found an old, ornate mirror covered in dust. It had been a wedding gift from Daniel's grandmother, a beautiful antique that we had never hung up. As I wiped away the grime, I felt a strange, magnetic pull towards the reflective surface. Suddenly, the room grew cold, and the lights flickered. I felt a presence behind me and turned to see Daniel's reflection in the mirror, looking back at me with sorrowful eyes. He reached out, and I heard his voice, faint and echoing, "Laura, please, help me." My breath caught in my throat as I stared into the mirror, Daniel's reflection shimmering in the glass like a distant memory. His eyes, once filled with warmth and mischief, now held a desperate plea. The room around me felt suspended in time, the air thick with anticipation. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold surface of the mirror, and felt a shock of static electricity that sent shivers down my spine. "Daniel, where are you? How can I help you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The reflection began to waver, and I heard his voice, faint but clear. "I'm trapped between worlds, Laura. The mirror is a gateway. You must find the key to free me." As the words faded, the mirror returned to its ordinary, reflective state, leaving me alone with 1,000 questions and a pounding heart. The next morning, Clara came over again. I told her everything, my voice a rush of frantic urgency. She listened intently, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "We need to find out more about this mirror," she said. "There must be something that can help us understand what's happening." We spent the day poring over old books and documents, searching for any mention of the mirror or its powers. Finally, in an old family journal belonging to Daniel's grandmother, we found a reference to the mirror. It was said to be an ancient artifact, capable of connecting the living world with the realm of spirits. The key, according to the journal, was a talisman that had been lost generations ago. That night, I received another email from Daniel. The talisman is hidden in the old chapel near the cemetery. You must find it, but be careful. There are forces that don't want us to be reunited. His words filled me with both hope and dread. The chapel had been abandoned for years, a decaying relic of a bygone era, and the thought of venturing there alone was terrifying. Clara insisted on coming with me. Armed with flashlights and a sense of determination, we made our way to the chapel under the cover of darkness. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the trees whispered secrets as we passed. The chapel loomed ahead, its silhouette a stark contrast against the moonlit sky. Inside, the chapel was a ruin of crumbling stone and rotting wood. We searched through the debris, our flashlights casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. In a corner, beneath a pile of rubble, I found a small, ornate box. My heart raced as I opened it to reveal an intricately carved talisman, its surface glinting in the dim light. As I held the talisman, I felt a strange warmth emanate from it, a pulsating energy that seemed to resonate with the mirror's power. Clara and I hurried back to the house, our footsteps echoing in the silent night. Back in the attic, I approached the mirror with the talisman in hand. I held the talisman up to the mirror, and the air around me seemed to vibrate with a low hum. The reflection of Daniel appeared once more, his eyes wide with hope. "You found it," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Now, place the talisman against the mirror and say my name." With a trembling hand, I pressed the talisman to the glass and whispered, "Daniel." The mirror began to glow with an ethereal light, and the reflection shimmered as if it were made of liquid silver. Daniel reached out, and I felt his hand, warm and real, clasp mine. Just as I thought he might step through, a dark shadow loomed behind him, and his expression turned to one of terror. "No," he cried out. "They're here. Don't let go." Before I could react, the shadowy figure pulled him back, and the mirror's light faded. The talisman slipped from my hand, and I collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Clara rushed to my side, but there was nothing she could say to ease the agony of losing Daniel again. The days that followed were a blur of grief and determination. Clara stayed with me, refusing to leave me alone with my sorrow. The emails from Daniel stopped, and the house felt emptier than ever, as if the echoes of our past had been silenced by the shadow that had taken him. One morning, as I sat staring at the mirror, the talisman clutched in my hand, Clara suggested we visit a medium she knew. At first, I was skeptical, but with no other leads, I reluctantly agreed. The medium, an elderly woman named Marguerite, welcomed us into her quaint, candlelit home. Her eyes were deep wells of wisdom and mystery. Marguerite listened as I recounted my story, her expression grave. When I finished, she took my hands in hers, her grip surprisingly strong. "The mirror is a powerful artifact, but it is also a dangerous one," she said. "The shadow you saw is a guardian of the realm between worlds. It doesn't want the living to interfere." I showed her the talisman, and she examined it closely. "This talisman is part of the key, but not the whole. To truly free Daniel, you must confront the guardian and reclaim his soul. There is a ritual, but it requires great courage and a willingness to face the unknown." That night, Marguerite guided Clara and me through the ritual. We gathered around the mirror, the talisman placed at its base, and lit candles in a circle. Marguerite chanted in a language I didn't understand, her voice rising and falling like the tide. As she spoke, the mirror began to glow once more, and I felt the familiar pull of its power. Suddenly, the room grew icy cold, and the shadow appeared, looming large and menacing. Its form was a swirling mass of darkness, with eyes that glowed like embers. I could feel its hatred, a palpable force that sought to drive us away. But I couldn't back down, not now. I stepped forward, the talisman clutched tightly in my hand. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, my voice steady despite the terror gripping my heart. "I want Daniel back. He doesn't belong in your world." The shadow hissed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. It reached out, tendrils of darkness snaking towards me. I closed my eyes and focused on Daniel, on our love and the life we had shared. The talisman grew warm in my hand, and I felt a surge of energy flow through me. "Daniel." I called out. "I'm here. Come back to me." The mirror's light intensified, and for a moment, the shadow wavered. I saw Daniel's reflection, his face filled with hope and determination. He reached out, and this time, our hands connected with a jolt of electricity. The shadow roared in anger, but I held firm, refusing to let go. With a final, desperate effort, I pulled Daniel through the mirror. The shadow shrieked and disintegrated into nothingness, the room flooding with light. Daniel collapsed into my arms, solid and real, his body trembling with exhaustion. I held him tightly, tears streaming down my face. Marguerite's voice cut through the haze. "It is done. You have reclaimed his soul." She placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch grounding me in the reality of the moment. Clara watched, her face a mask of relief and wonder. In the days that followed, Daniel slowly regained his strength. He told me of the shadowy realm, a place of eternal twilight where he had wandered, searching for a way back. The emails had been his desperate attempts to reach out, hoping I would find the key to his return. Life didn't return to normal overnight, but with Daniel by my side, I felt whole again. The mirror and talisman were carefully hidden away, their power dormant but ever present. We knew the Shadow's realm was still out there, a dark mirror to our world, but as long as we were together, we could face whatever came our way. As we sat together one evening, the glow of the setting sun casting long shadows across the room, Daniel squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Laura," he said softly. "You saved me." And as I looked into his eyes, I knew that our love had conquered even the darkest of shadows. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Tapping. Living on the 12th floor had its perks, a breathtaking view of the city, a quiet distance from the bustling streets below, and a sense of seclusion I had come to cherish. My apartment was a sanctuary of solitude, filled with the artifacts of my life, books lining the shelves, a collection of vintage clocks, and a thick carpet that muffled every footstep. It was in this cocoon of comfort that the first tap reached my ears. It was a cold winter night, and the wind howled outside, its mournful wail wrapping around the building. I sat by my desk, a hot cup of tea in hand, engrossed in a novel. The gentle, rhythmic tapping on the window drew my attention. I glanced up, expecting to see a branch swaying in the wind. But there were no trees that high. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate, sending a shiver down my spine. I walked to the window and peered out into the darkness. The city lights glowed below, cars moving like tiny beetles. My reflection stared back at me, pale and concerned. There was nothing outside but the endless night and the sound of the wind. I shook my head, chalking it up to the building settling or some other mundane cause. I returned to my book, though my mind was no longer on the story. The tapping grew louder as the hours passed, each knock echoing in the silence of my apartment. I tried to ignore it, to immerse myself in the pages before me, but the sound burrowed into my consciousness, refusing to be dismissed. I began to feel an inexplicable unease, a sense that I was not alone. It was as if the very air in the room had grown heavier, pressing down on me with invisible weight. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice wavering. There was no answer, only the relentless tapping. I moved closer to the window, my heart pounding. I placed my hand against the cold glass, half expecting to feel a response. Nothing. I pulled back the curtains, exposing the black void outside. The tapping stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Sleep was impossible that night. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the sound over and over. When dawn finally broke, I was exhausted, my eyes gritty with fatigue. I went through my day in a daze, the memory of the tapping haunting my every thought. By evening, I was on edge, every creak and groan of the building sending my nerves into overdrive. As darkness fell once more, I prepared for another sleepless night. I sat in my armchair, a glass of wine in hand, staring at the window. The tapping began again, soft at first, then growing louder and more insistent. This time, I felt a chill in the air, a cold that seeped into my bones. I wrapped a blanket around myself, but the cold persisted, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. Determined to find the source of the sound, I approached the window with renewed resolve. I pressed my face against the glass, my breath fogging up the pane. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a shadow flitting past, too quick to be anything solid. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The tapping had returned, now accompanied by a low whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Let me in," the voice hissed, sending a bolt of terror through me. I backed away, my mind racing. I had to find a way to stop it, to understand what was happening. But deep down, I knew that whatever was out there was not something I could easily escape. Hey, subscribe for more scary stories. The next morning, I was a wreck. I could barely keep my eyes open, and my hands trembled as I sipped my coffee. The events of the previous night played over and over in my mind, like a twisted reel of film. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the tapping was a warning of something far more sinister. Desperate for answers, I decided to visit the building manager, Mr. Alvarez. Mr. Alvarez was a grizzled old man with a stooped back and a perpetually sour expression. His office was a cluttered mess of paperwork and ancient, dust-covered furniture. As I recounted my experience, his face remained impassive, but I noticed a flicker of something in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or fear. "You say you heard tapping on the window?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Yes," I replied, my frustration mounting. "And I saw a shadow, heard a voice. It said, 'Let me in.'" Mr. Alvarez sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "You're not the first tenant to experience this," he admitted reluctantly. "There have been stories, rumors, but nothing I can prove." "What kind of stories?" I pressed, leaning forward in my chair. He hesitated, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger. "This building has a history," he began. "It was built in the 1920s, and over the years, there have been incidents. People seeing things, hearing things. Most dismiss it as urban legends." He opened the ledger and flipped through the pages, stopping at a particular entry. "This apartment you're in, it used to belong to a woman named Isabel Vasquez. She was a recluse, kept to herself. One day, she simply vanished. No trace of her was ever found." I felt a chill run down my spine. "And you think she's the one tapping on my window?" Mr. Alvarez shrugged. "Who can say? But her disappearance left a mark on this place. It's as if the building remembers." I left his office with more questions than answers, my mind reeling. Who was Isabel Vasquez? What had happened to her? And why was she reaching out to me? I spent the rest of the day researching, digging through old newspaper archives and online forums. The deeper I delved, the more unsettling the story became. Isabel Vasquez had been a woman of mystery. Neighbors described her as quiet, always polite but distant. She had no family, no friends, at least, none that anyone knew of. Her disappearance had been sudden and complete, as if she had vanished into thin air. The police had found no evidence of foul play, and the case had gone cold. As night fell, I prepared myself for another encounter. I armed myself with a flashlight and a camera, hoping to capture some evidence of the supernatural. The tapping began right on cue, as persistent as ever. This time, I was ready. I approached the window slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. "Isabel," I whispered, feeling foolish. "If you're there, show yourself." The tapping stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, a figure materialized on the other side of the glass, a woman, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. She raised a hand and placed it against the window, her mouth moving soundlessly. I snapped a photo, my hands shaking. The camera flashed, and for a split second, the room was bathed in light. When the darkness returned, the woman was gone. I examined the photo, my breath catching in my throat. There she was, clear as day, her face twisted in an expression of anguish. "Help me," the voice echoed in my mind, a desperate plea that sent chills down my spine. Sleep eluded me that night. The image of Isabel's anguished face was seared into my mind. I knew I had to dig deeper to uncover the truth about her disappearance. I decided to explore my apartment more thoroughly, hoping to find something that might shed light on the mystery. The next day, I started my search. I combed through every corner, inspecting the walls, the floors, and even the ceiling for hidden compartments. Hours passed with no success. Just as I was about to give up, I noticed something odd about the floorboards in the closet. One of them was loose. My heart raced as I pried it up, revealing a small, dusty box hidden beneath. Inside the box was a diary, its pages yellowed with age. The cover was inscribed with the name Isabel Vasquez. My hands trembled as I opened it, feeling a strange connection to the woman who had once lived here. Her handwriting was neat and elegant, but the words told a story of isolation and fear. March 3, 1928, the tapping started again last night. It's been weeks since I first heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but now I know better. Something is trying to reach me, something from beyond. I don't know what it wants, but I can feel its presence, watching me, waiting. March 12, 1928, I saw her today. A woman, standing outside my window. She looked just like me, but her eyes were hollow, empty. She whispered my name, begged me to let her in. I don't understand what's happening. Am I losing my mind? The entries grew more frantic, more desperate, as Isabel detailed her encounters with the apparition. She wrote about sleepless nights, the unrelenting cold, and the whispers that haunted her every moment. Her fear was palpable, a mirror of my own growing dread. April 5, 1928, I can't take it anymore. The tapping, the whispers. They're driving me mad. I've tried to leave, but every time I step out of the apartment, I feel an invisible force pulling me back. It's as if the building itself won't let me go. The final entry was the most chilling. April 15, 1928, tonight, I'm going to end this. I have no other choice. If anyone finds this diary, please forgive me. I didn't want to leave this way, but I can't endure the torment any longer. I hope my spirit finds peace. The diary ended there. I closed it, my mind reeling. Isabel hadn't just disappeared, she had taken her own life, driven to the brink by the same terror that now plagued me. But if she was dead, who or what was the figure I had seen? That night, I placed the diary on the table and sat by the window, waiting. The tapping started, as persistent as ever. I opened the diary to the final page, hoping for some kind of connection, some understanding. The air grew cold, and the shadows in the room deepened. Isabel, I called out, my voice steady. I found your diary. I know what happened to you. Please, tell me what you want. The room was silent except for the sound of my own breathing. Then, slowly, the figure appeared again. Isabel, or whatever remained of her, stood on the other side of the glass, her expression mournful. She pressed her hand against the window, and I did the same, feeling an icy chill seep into my bones. Help me, she mouthed again, her eyes pleading. How? I asked aloud. How can I help you? The figure began to fade, but not before pointing towards the diary. I looked down and saw that new words had appeared on the final page, written in Isabel's elegant script. Find the key, it said. A sense of purpose surged within me. I had to find this key, whatever it unlocked, to free Isabel from her torment. But as I pondered this, a loud crash came from the hallway outside my apartment. The air grew colder still, and I knew I wasn't alone. I hesitated for a moment, my hand frozen on the doorknob. The crash echoed in my mind, amplifying my fear. Gathering my courage, I swung the door open and stepped into the dimly lit hallway. The air was icy, and an unnatural stillness pervaded the space. I scanned the corridor, my heart pounding, but saw nothing out of place. The silence was oppressive, pressing in from all sides. My mind raced as I tried to piece together the clues Isabel had left behind. The key, she had written. But a key to what? I returned to my apartment and retrieved the diary, flipping through the pages for any mention of a key. Near the beginning, I found a passage I had overlooked. March 7th, 1928. I've hidden the key in a place only I know. It's my only hope of keeping the darkness at bay. If anyone finds this, look where the shadows dwell. The shadows. I looked around my apartment, trying to decipher her cryptic message. The sun had set, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. I noticed a dark corner near the bookshelf, a place I rarely paid attention to. Moving the books aside, I discovered a small, hidden compartment in the wall. My fingers trembled as I pried it open, revealing an old, ornate key. Holding the key, I felt a strange sense of connection to Isabel, as if her spirit was guiding me. The key was heavy, its surface cool and smooth. I knew it had to open something significant, something that would reveal the final piece of the puzzle. As I pondered its purpose, the tapping resumed, louder and more insistent than ever. I turned towards the window, and there she was, Isabel, her face a mask of sorrow. She gestured towards the door with a sense of urgency. I understood then that the key was not meant for my apartment, but for something beyond. I slipped the key into my pocket and followed the apparition into the hallway. The building seemed to shift around me, the walls closing in and the shadows deepening. I moved cautiously, the key clutched tightly in my hand. Isabel's ghostly form led me to the basement, a place I had never dared to venture. The air grew colder as we descended, the silence broken only by the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls. In the basement, I found an old storage room, its door marked with strange, faded symbols. I inserted the key into the lock, and it turned smoothly. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, musty space filled with forgotten relics and broken furniture. At the center of the room stood a large, antique mirror, its surface covered in dust and grime. As I approached the mirror, a sense of dread washed over me. The glass was cracked, and I could barely make out my own reflection. Isabel appeared beside me, her eyes full of sorrow and hope. She pointed to the mirror, and I understood what I had to do. I wiped away the dust, revealing a hidden compartment at the back of the mirror frame. Inside the compartment was a small, ornate box. I opened it with trembling hands, revealing a set of old, yellowed letters tied with a black ribbon. The letters were addressed to Isabel from a man named Gabriel, detailing a forbidden love affair that had ended tragically. Gabriel had been accused of witchcraft and executed, leaving Isabel alone and heartbroken. The letters revealed that Isabel had tried to summon Gabriel's spirit, using dark rituals she barely understood. In her grief, she had opened a doorway to the other side, allowing something else to come through. Something malevolent. The entity had tormented her, leading to her ultimate despair and disappearance. Isabel's ghost looked at me, her eyes pleading for release. I knew what I had to do. I gathered the letters and set them alight with a candle I found in the room. The flames consumed the paper, and as the last of the letters turned to ash, I felt a rush of cold air and heard a faint whisper of gratitude. The mirror cracked further, and Isabel's image began to fade. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a mere echo. "It's over now." Just as I felt a sense of relief wash over me, the basement door slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. The temperature plummeted, and the air grew thick with a presence that was not Isabel. The shadows around me twisted and writhed, forming into a dark, malevolent figure. "She may be free," it hissed, its voice a chilling rasp, "but you have opened the door for me." Before I could react, the entity lunged towards me, and the world plunged into darkness. Comment your favorite food if you've made it this far. Story 3. The Inheritance. When my grandmother passed away, her house became my inheritance. The house stood on the outskirts of a small, fog-laden town, an ancient Victorian structure that seemed perpetually shrouded in gloom. I had always been intrigued by the house as a child, but never had the courage to explore its depths. Now, as its new owner, I found myself standing on the creaky porch, key in hand, ready to face whatever secrets it held. The interior was exactly as I remembered: dark wooden floors, faded wallpaper, and an eerie quiet that hung in the air like a specter. Among the furniture and knickknacks accumulated over decades, one piece stood out: a massive, ornate mirror in the hallway. It had always unnerved me. Unlike any other mirror, it never reflected my image as a child. I chalked it up to some trick of the light or my overactive imagination, but now, standing before it as an adult, I couldn't deny the unease it caused. On my first night in the house, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I wandered the halls, every creak of the floorboards sending chills down my spine. The mirror loomed at the end of the hallway, its surface dark and foreboding. Despite my apprehension, I approached it, peering into its depths. As expected, it reflected everything: the hallway, the flickering candlelight, everything except me. Days passed, and the house's oppressive atmosphere began to take its toll. I started hearing whispers in the dead of night, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from within the walls. Objects moved on their own, doors creaked open without cause, and the mirror began to change. One evening, as I walked past it, I saw a shadow flicker within its depths, a fleeting glimpse of movement that sent my heart racing. Determined to understand the mirror's strange behavior, I began researching its origins. Old family records and dusty journals spoke of a curse, a dark history tied to the mirror's creation. It was said that the mirror trapped the souls of those who gazed into it for too long, holding them captive in a world of endless reflection. The more I read, the more convinced I became that something malevolent resided within its glass. Then, one night, it happened. I woke to the sound of scratching, like nails on a chalkboard, emanating from the hallway. Heart pounding, I grabbed a flashlight and crept towards the noise. As I approached the mirror, the scratching grew louder, more frantic. The beam of my flashlight illuminated the surface, and there, staring back at me, was an older version of myself. The figure was gaunt, with hollow eyes and a look of sheer terror etched on its face. It raised a trembling hand and mouthed a single, chilling word: "Run." I stumbled back, heart hammering in my chest. The reflection faded, leaving only the dark, empty hallway behind me. I knew then that the house held more than just memories of my grandmother. It held a darkness that threatened to consume me. The mirror had shown me my future, a warning I could not ignore. But what was I running from? And how could I escape a fate that seemed already written? Sleep became elusive after that night. Every creak and groan of the house seemed amplified, every shadow held potential terror. I avoided the mirror, but its presence was inescapable, a sinister weight pressing down on me. Determined to unravel the mystery, I dove deeper into my grandmother's journals, hoping to find answers in her meticulous handwriting. One entry caught my eye, dated shortly before her death. It spoke of nightmares and voices, of a figure in the mirror that wasn't her reflection. "The mirror shows what we fear most," she had written, "and once seen, it cannot be unseen." My blood ran cold as I realized she had faced the same horrors that now plagued me. Was this why she had never mentioned the mirror in her will? Had she hoped to spare me from its curse? Desperation drove me to seek help. I contacted an old family friend, Father O'Malley, a priest with a reputation for dealing with the supernatural. He arrived at the house, his stern demeanor softened by genuine concern. As we stood before the mirror, he whispered prayers and sprinkled holy water, his eyes never leaving its surface. "This mirror," he said gravely, "is a gateway. Something evil lies beyond." We decided to cover the mirror, hoping to diminish its influence. But even shrouded in heavy cloth, it seemed to pulse with dark energy. The whispers continued, growing louder each night. One evening, as I sat in the living room, I heard my grandmother's voice, soft and sorrowful. "James," she called, "help me." I rushed to the hallway, heart in my throat, only to find the mirror uncovered, the cloth discarded on the floor. Father O'Malley returned the next day with more holy artifacts. We performed a ritual, trying to cleanse the house. As we chanted, the air grew thick and the temperature plummeted. Shadows writhed on the walls, and the mirror began to glow with an eerie light. Suddenly, a force knocked us back, and the mirror cracked, a thin line spidering across its surface. "The crack is a weakness," Father O'Malley gasped, struggling to his feet. "We must destroy it." But the mirror had other plans. As we approached, the glass shimmered, and a dark, twisted version of myself emerged from its depths. It grinned malevolently, eyes gleaming with malice. "You cannot escape," it hissed. "This house is mine." Terror gripped me as I realized the truth. The mirror was not just a window to another world, it was a prison, holding something ancient and malevolent. And now, it wanted to claim me as its next victim. Father O'Malley grabbed a heavy candlestick and swung it at the mirror. The glass shattered, pieces flying in all directions. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the house erupted in chaos. The walls shook, and a deafening roar filled the air. Shadows surged from the broken mirror, swirling around us like a storm. Father O'Malley shouted for me to run, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. I stumbled towards the door, but the shadows closed in, cold and suffocating. Just as I felt myself being pulled into the darkness, a blinding light exploded around me, and everything went black. When I awoke, the house was silent. The mirror lay in shards on the floor, and Father O'Malley was gone. I was alone, the weight of what had happened pressing down on me. The mirror's curse was broken, but at what cost? And what had become of Father O'Malley? As I stood amidst the wreckage, a new fear took hold. The evil that had been trapped in the mirror was free, and it was only a matter of time before it found me again. The days following the destruction of the mirror were filled with an eerie calm, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Father O'Malley's disappearance weighed heavily on me. I searched every corner of the house, calling his name, but there was no sign of him. The town police were skeptical, attributing his absence to the stress and shock of the ritual. They promised to investigate, but their lack of urgency was palpable. I couldn't leave the house, not yet. Something compelled me to stay, a sense that the story wasn't over. I continued my research, combing through my grandmother's belongings for any clue that might explain what had happened. Late one night, I discovered a hidden compartment in her writing desk, revealing a collection of old letters and photographs. Among them was a letter addressed to me, written in my grandmother's familiar, looping script. "Dearest James," it began, "if you are reading this, then my fears have come to pass. The mirror is more than a family heirloom, it is a sentinel, a barrier between our world and something far darker. It was given to our family by an ancestor who dabbled in forbidden arts. The mirror holds a spirit, an ancient evil that feeds on fear and despair. I tried to protect you by never speaking of it, but I see now that silence was a mistake." The letter went on to describe a ritual, a way to banish the spirit permanently. It required a personal sacrifice, something of great value to the person performing it. My grandmother had attempted it but failed, her own fears too strong to overcome. "You are stronger than I ever was," she wrote. "You have the courage to face what I could not. Do not let this darkness consume you, as it did me." Armed with this knowledge, I prepared for the final confrontation. The ritual called for a series of symbols to be drawn in a circle, with the shattered pieces of the mirror placed at the center. I needed something of great personal value, a token of my own vulnerability. I chose a locket my grandmother had given me, containing a photo of us together. It represented not just my love for her, but my deepest fear, losing her all over again. As night fell, I began the ritual. The symbols glowed faintly in the dim light, the air thick with anticipation. I placed the locket in the center of the circle, along with the mirror shards. The house seemed to hold its breath, the silence oppressive. I began to chant the incantation from my grandmother's letter, my voice trembling. The air grew colder, and shadows gathered at the edges of the room, watching. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the house, extinguishing my candles. The shadows surged forward, coalescing into a familiar form, the twisted version of myself that had emerged from the mirror. It smiled, a cold, mocking expression. "You think you can banish me?" it sneered. "You are nothing but a scared child, hiding behind your grandmother's skirts." "I'm not afraid of you," I shouted, though my voice wavered. I continued the chant, forcing the words out through sheer willpower. The shadow self laughed, a sound like broken glass. It lunged at me, but was repelled by the circle of symbols, writhing in frustration. "You cannot win," it hissed. "This house will be your tomb." The room darkened further, the shadows pressing in. I felt a crushing weight on my chest, my strength ebbing away. The locket glowed faintly, a beacon in the darkness. With the last of my energy, I reached out and clasped it in my hand, focusing on the memory of my grandmother. Her voice echoed in my mind, a soothing balm against the fear. "Be brave, James. You can do this." Summoning every ounce of courage, I shouted the final words of the incantation. The symbols flared with blinding light, the shadows shrieking in agony. The dark figure dissolved, its screams echoing through the house. The light intensified, filling the room, and I felt the oppressive weight lift. The shadows receded, leaving only silence and the faint glow of the locket. Exhausted, I collapsed to the floor, clutching the locket. The ritual had worked, the evil was banished, the house once again quiet. But the victory felt hollow. Father O'Malley was still missing, and I had no idea where he had gone or if he was even alive. As I lay there, catching my breath, a new thought struck me. What if the spirit wasn't truly gone? What if it was merely biding its time, waiting for another opportunity to strike? The days that followed the ritual were filled with an uneasy peace. The house seemed to have returned to its dormant state, no longer alive with the malevolent energy that had haunted me. Yet, the uncertainty of Father O'Malley's fate gnawed at me. I couldn't leave until I knew what had happened to him, or if he was even still within the house. One evening, as I rummaged through the attic, hoping to find some overlooked clue, I came across an old photograph. It was of my grandmother and a group of people dressed in antiquated clothing, standing in front of the house. Among them was a man who bore an uncanny resemblance to Father O'Malley. My heart skipped a beat. Was it possible he had been connected to this place long before my time? The idea was unsettling but made a strange kind of sense. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to explore the cellar, the one part of the house I had avoided. The cellar door creaked ominously as I opened it, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. With a flashlight in hand, I descended, the air growing colder with each step. The cellar was damp and musty, filled with old furniture and forgotten relics. In the far corner, I found a hidden door, its edges barely visible in the dim light. It led to a small, secret room, and within, I discovered a shrine of sorts. Candles, long extinguished, surrounded a small altar. On it lay a book, ancient and bound in leather. As I opened it, the pages crackled with age. The text was written in Latin, but I recognized some of the symbols from the ritual I had performed. This was the source of the curse, the original spell that had trapped the spirit within the mirror. As I read, I heard a faint noise behind me, a whisper, like the rustling of leaves. I turned, my flashlight beam revealing Father O'Malley, standing at the entrance. His face was pale, eyes hollow, but he was alive. "Father!" I cried, rushing to his side. He looked at me, his expression one of exhaustion and relief. "James," he murmured, "you found it." Together, we pieced together the truth. The man in the photograph, the one who looked like Father O'Malley, was his ancestor. He had been the one to first trap the spirit, using the mirror as a prison. The curse had bound his bloodline to the house, compelling each generation to guard the secret. Father O'Malley had been drawn here, unknowingly fulfilling his ancestors' duty. "There's one final step," he said, his voice weak. "We must destroy the source of the curse." He pointed to the book. "This spell must be undone." We prepared for the final ritual, setting up in the secret room. The symbols were drawn once again, the pieces of the shattered mirror placed at the center. This time, we both held items of personal significance, his crucifix and my locket. As we began the incantation, the air grew thick with tension, the shadows in the room deepening. The moment we uttered the final words, the room exploded with light. The book ignited, flames consuming the ancient pages. The shadows screamed, writhing as they were pulled towards the burning book. The mirror shards glowed, vibrating with energy. Then, with a final, ear-splitting crack, they disintegrated into dust. The light faded, leaving us in silence. The oppressive weight that had hung over the house lifted, replaced by a profound sense of peace. Father O'Malley and I emerged from the cellar, exhausted but triumphant. The curse was broken, the spirit banished forever. The house, once a place of fear, felt strangely welcoming. In the days that followed, I prepared to leave, finally ready to say goodbye to my grandmother's house. Father O'Malley returned to his parish, his duty fulfilled. As I packed my belongings, I found the locket, still warm from the ritual. I opened it, staring at the photo of my grandmother and me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of closure. On my last night, I stood on the porch, gazing at the house. It no longer felt like a prison, but a testament to the strength and courage of those who had fought to protect their loved ones. As I turned to leave, I glanced back one final time, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw my grandmother standing in the doorway, smiling. The mirror might be gone, but her spirit would always be with me, a guardian in the shadows. Story 4. The Glimpse. The first time it happened, I dismissed it as a trick of the light. It was late, well past midnight, and I had been poring over old family albums in the dim light of my study. The old house creaked around me, as if echoing the memories trapped within its walls. My eyes were heavy with exhaustion, and I had just closed them for a moment when I felt it, a presence, cold and intrusive, breathing against my face. My eyes snapped open, and there it was, a face, pale and distorted, hovering just inches from mine. I recoiled, heart pounding, and the face vanished as quickly as it had appeared. For a moment, I sat frozen, unable to move or breathe. The rational part of my mind tried to assert control, convincing me it was just a hallucination brought on by fatigue. I forced myself to take deep breaths, to calm down. "It's nothing," I muttered to myself. "Just tired." But the feeling of being watched lingered. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was not alone in that room. The shadows seemed to grow darker, the air colder. I decided it was best to call it a night and headed upstairs to my bedroom, casting nervous glances over my shoulder the entire way. As I lay in bed, sleep eluded me. Every creak and groan of the house set my nerves on edge, and I found myself staring at the ceiling, afraid to close my eyes. The next day, I tried to carry on as usual, but the experience haunted me. I kept seeing that face in my mind's eye, its hollow eyes and twisted mouth etched into my memory. I began to question my sanity. Was it stress from work? Perhaps the recent move to this old family estate was taking a toll on my psyche. I resolved to keep busy, hoping that distraction would help. But the sightings continued. At first, it was only when I closed my eyes, usually late at night. The face would appear, always the same, gaunt, pale, and terrifyingly close. It never spoke, never moved, just stared at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I began to dread sleep, and my insomnia worsened. I could feel the strain it was putting on my body and mind. Weeks passed, and the situation grew more dire. I began to see the face even with my eyes open. It would flash in the corner of my vision, or reflect in the glass of a window. Once, I saw it in the mirror as I brushed my teeth, its vacant eyes boring into mine. I screamed and dropped the toothbrush, backing away in terror. The face disappeared, but the damage was done. I was no longer sure of what was real and what was not. Desperation led me to seek help. I confided in a friend, Dr. Allen, a psychiatrist who specialized in sleep disorders. He listened patiently as I described the face and the relentless torment it brought. "It sounds like you're experiencing hypnagogic hallucinations," he said, "visions that occur as you're falling asleep. They're not uncommon, especially under stress." "But it's happening when I'm awake," I insisted. "It's like it's crossing over." Dr. Allen prescribed medication to help me sleep and suggested a series of relaxation techniques. I followed his advice religiously, clinging to the hope that it would provide relief. But the face persisted, growing bolder with each passing night. And now, it was beginning to invade my days, appearing more frequently and with increasing clarity. One evening, as I sat in my study, I saw it again. This time, it did not vanish immediately. The face lingered, solid and undeniable. I could see every detail, the sunken cheeks, the dark circles under its eyes, the cracked lips. And then, for the first time, it spoke. "Help me," it whispered, its voice like a death rattle. "Please, help me." Hey, subscribe for more scary stories. I stared, dumbstruck, at the face before me. It hovered in the air, its eyes pleading and desperate. "Help me," it repeated, and this time, I could see the moisture in its eyes, the sheer agony etched into its features. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the thudding of my heartbeat. The face blinked, and for a moment, I thought it might vanish again. But it didn't. Instead, it seemed to grow more solid, more real. "My name is William," the face said. "I lived here, a long time ago." My mind raced. The house had been in my family for generations, passed down through the years. I tried to recall any mention of a William, but nothing came to mind. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice trembling. William's face contorted in pain. "I'm trapped," he said. "I've been trapped here for so long. You must help me find peace." "How?" I asked, feeling a surge of both pity and fear. "What can I do?" "Find my body," William said. "Bury me properly. Only then can I rest." The words sent a chill down my spine. The idea of finding a corpse hidden somewhere in the house was horrifying, but I couldn't ignore the desperation in William's voice. "Where is it?" I asked. "In the basement," he said. "Behind the old furnace. Please, hurry." And with that, the face faded, leaving me alone in the dimly lit study. I sat there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. It seemed impossible, but there was a haunted look in William's eyes that I couldn't forget. I knew I had to do something. That night, armed with a flashlight and a sense of dread, I made my way down to the basement. The air was musty, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. I approached the old furnace, a hulking piece of machinery that hadn't been used in decades. My hands shook as I shone the flashlight behind it. The beam of light revealed a narrow space, cluttered with old boxes and debris. I steeled myself and began to move the obstacles aside. After what felt like an eternity, I uncovered a small, hidden alcove. And there, wrapped in a decaying sheet, was a skeleton. I gasped and stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. The sight was more gruesome than I had imagined, the bones brittle and covered in a thick layer of dust. But there was no mistaking it, this was William. I felt a mix of horror and pity as I looked at the remains. This man had been trapped here for so long, his soul unable to find peace. I knew I had to help him, no matter how terrifying the task. I carefully gathered the bones, trying to treat them with the respect they deserved, and placed them in a sturdy box. The next morning, I arranged for a proper burial. I chose a spot in the family cemetery, a peaceful area under the shade of an old oak tree. As the coffin was lowered into the ground, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For a while, things seemed to improve. The face no longer appeared, and I began to sleep through the night again. But the peace was short-lived. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt the familiar coldness return. I opened my eyes, and there it was, William's face, inches from mine. "You failed," he whispered, his voice filled with a new kind of torment. "It's not enough. You must find the others." "Others?" I gasped, sitting up in bed. "What do you mean?" "There are more," William said. "More like me, trapped in this house. You must find them all." The room seemed to spin, and I clutched the sheets, feeling the terror seep into my bones. The task was far from over, and the true horror was only just beginning. The weight of William's words crushed my hope. "More like me," he had said, and the thought of more trapped souls sent shivers down my spine. But there was no turning back now. I had made a commitment to see this through, no matter how horrifying the journey. The following day, I started researching the history of the house, delving into old records and family journals. The stories I uncovered were chilling. There were accounts of strange disappearances, unexplained deaths, and rumors of the house being cursed. Each entry seemed to weave a tapestry of terror, connecting the dots between the restless spirits and the old mansion. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a pair of eyes, every whisper of the wind a call for help. I decided to confront the presence directly, hoping to gain some clarity. "William," I called out into the darkness. "Are you here?" The air grew colder, and there he was, his face materializing before me. "Yes," he said. "And so are the others." "Where do I start?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "The attic," William replied. "It's where she was kept." "She." The word hung in the air like a ghost itself. I made my way to the attic, a place I had always avoided. The door creaked open, revealing a space thick with dust and forgotten memories. Old furniture and trunks were strewn about, covered in cobwebs. The air was stifling, and the darkness seemed almost tangible. I started searching, moving boxes and peering into corners. My flashlight beam fell on an old trunk, its surface scarred and worn. I opened it, and there, among the remnants of a bygone era, was a small diary. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. It belonged to a girl named Elizabeth. Her entries spoke of fear and isolation. She wrote about being confined to the attic by a cruel guardian, punished for reasons she couldn't understand. The final entries were the most disturbing, describing her growing desperation and the haunting presence she felt in the shadows. Her last words were a plea for help, scrawled in a shaky hand. "I don't want to be alone anymore." I felt a pang of sorrow for Elizabeth. Her spirit, trapped by fear and suffering, was crying out for release. "Elizabeth," I whispered, "I will help you." That night, as I prepared for bed, I felt her presence. The air grew heavy, and the temperature dropped. "Elizabeth?" I called softly. She appeared, her face delicate and sorrowful. "Please," she said, her voice a mere whisper. "I need to be free." "How can I help you?" I asked, determined to ease her suffering. "Find my locket," she replied. "It holds my essence. Destroy it, and I will be free." The next day, I scoured the attic again, searching for the locket. It took hours, but finally, hidden in a crack in the floorboards, I found it, a small, ornate piece of jewelry, tarnished with age. Holding it in my hand, I felt a strange connection to Elizabeth, as if her very soul was intertwined with the delicate chain. With a heavy heart, I took the locket to the backyard. As I stood over a small fire, I hesitated. Destroying it felt wrong, but I knew it was the only way to set her free. I dropped the locket into the flames, and as it melted away, I heard a soft sigh, almost like a breath of relief. That night, Elizabeth appeared to me one last time. "Thank you," she said, her face serene. "You have freed me." But my relief was short-lived. William's face appeared beside hers, his expression grim. "There are still more," he said. "You must help them all." I felt the walls closing in, the weight of the task ahead nearly unbearable. The house was a prison for these souls, and it was my duty to release them. As I prepared for the next search, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The realization that my task was far from over weighed heavily on me. Each spirit freed seemed to intensify the presence of those still trapped. I could feel the house itself pulsing with restless energy, as if it were a living entity begging for release. The final confrontation was inevitable, and I steeled myself for what lay ahead. William's face appeared again, more solid and more human than before. "There are 3 more," he said. "Their pain binds them here. You must release them all, or none of us can find peace." "Where do I find them?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "The nursery," he said. "Start there." The nursery. I had always avoided that room, with its faded wallpaper and broken toys. It was a place of sadness, and now I understood why. The door creaked open, revealing the remnants of a child's world frozen in time. Dolls with cracked faces stared from dusty shelves, and a small rocking horse stood still in the corner. I began to search, moving methodically through the room. Under the floorboards, behind the old dresser, in the closet, nothing. Frustration gnawed at me until I noticed a loose board under the window. I pried it up, revealing a small box. Inside were the belongings of a child, a pair of shoes, a tiny dress, and a silver rattle. A cold breeze swept through the room, and I felt her presence. "Hello?" I called out softly. A girl appeared, no older than 5, her face pale and sad. "My name is Mary," she said. "I want to go home." "How can I help you, Mary?" I asked, my heart breaking for her. "Take my things to the old oak tree," she whispered. "Bury them there. It's where I used to play." I did as she asked, digging a small hole beneath the tree and laying her belongings to rest. As I covered them with earth, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. Mary's face appeared, smiling gently. "Thank you," she said. "I'm free now." Back in the house, William's face appeared again, alongside another, a man, stern and sorrowful. "He was the caretaker," William said. "His name is Henry. He was murdered and framed for crimes he didn't commit. His spirit cannot rest until his name is cleared." I felt a pang of sympathy for Henry. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "Find his journal," Henry said. "It contains the truth." The study held the answers. I searched through the dusty bookshelves and old desks until I found a hidden drawer. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Henry's meticulous handwriting. It detailed the events leading up to his death, proving his innocence. I took the journal to the local authorities, who reopened the case and cleared Henry's name. That night, Henry appeared, his face peaceful. "Thank you," he said. "You have given me justice. I can rest now." One last spirit remained. William led me to the cellar, a dark and foreboding place. "Her name is Margaret," he said. "She was the housekeeper, accused of witchcraft and hanged. Her spirit seeks vengeance, but she must be forgiven to find peace." I found Margaret's spirit, her face twisted with anger and sorrow. "You seek to free me?" she snarled. "Yes," I said, standing my ground. "You deserve peace." Her eyes softened, and tears welled up. "I was wronged," she said. "My only crime was caring for this house and its people." "I forgive you," I said, feeling a weight lift from my heart. "You are free." Margaret's spirit began to dissolve, her face peaceful at last. As she disappeared, I felt the house release a collective sigh, the energy shifting to one of tranquility. William appeared one final time, his face glowing with gratitude. "You have done it," he said. "We are free. Thank you." The house was finally at peace, its restless spirits released from their torment. As I stood in the now quiet halls, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. But as I turned to leave, a cold breeze swept through, and a new face appeared in the shadows. "You think it's over?" the face whispered, its eyes burning with malevolence. "It's only just begun." The words chilled me to the bone. The true horror was yet to come. Story 5. The Whispering Door. When I first inherited my grandmother's old house, I felt more burdened than blessed. Nestled in the heart of a dense, brooding forest, the house had an air of neglect and mystery. Its dark wooden walls, sagging roof, and windows that seemed to follow me with every step added to the sense of unease. I intended to sell it off quickly, but something about the place kept me from listing it immediately. The cellar was the last part of the house I explored. Descending the creaky wooden stairs, a chill ran down my spine. The air was damp and cold, filled with the musty scent of age and decay. Old, rusted tools and broken furniture cluttered the space, but what caught my eye was a peculiar door at the far end of the cellar, half hidden behind a stack of rotting crates. It was unlike any other door in the house, smaller, with intricate carvings of symbols I didn't recognize, and an aura that seemed to whisper secrets. I moved the crates aside, my curiosity piqued. The door had no handle, just a keyhole. Searching the cellar, I found an old key hanging from a nail on the wall, as if it had been waiting for me. With trembling hands, I inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a dark, narrow passageway leading into the unknown. My heart pounded as I stepped through the door. The walls of the passageway were lined with ancient, crumbling bricks, and the air grew colder with each step. I reached the end of the passageway and found myself in a small, circular room. In the center of the room stood an old wooden table with a single candle burning brightly. The flame flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. On the table lay an old, leather-bound book, its cover adorned with more of those strange symbols. I approached the table, my eyes fixed on the book. As I reached out to touch it, the candle suddenly went out, plunging the room into darkness. Panic surged through me, and I fumbled for my flashlight. When I finally managed to turn it on, the room was empty. The book, the table, even the candle, all gone. My breath quickened as I turned to leave, but the passageway had vanished. I was trapped. Desperation clawed at my mind as I searched for any way out. My flashlight beam fell on another door, identical to the first, on the opposite side of the room. With no other options, I approached it and tried the key again. The door opened to reveal the cellar once more, but everything felt different, colder, darker, more sinister. I hurried back upstairs, slamming the cellar door shut behind me. For days, I tried to convince myself it was all a hallucination, a trick of the mind. But at night, I could hear it, the faint sound of the doorknob turning, as if someone, or something, was trying to get out. The whispers grew louder, filling the house with their insidious presence. Sleep became impossible, and fear gnawed at my sanity. The house, once merely unsettling, had become a prison of dread. Days turned into weeks, and the whispers grew more persistent. Each night, they echoed through the house, filling the air with a sense of foreboding. My nights were spent lying awake, listening to the relentless turning of the doorknob and the soft, insidious murmurs from the cellar. Exhaustion weighed heavily on me, but fear kept me from leaving. I felt tethered to the house, as if the whispers had woven an invisible chain around my soul. Determined to confront whatever lay behind that door, I armed myself with knowledge. I pored over my grandmother's old journals, hoping to find some clue about the house's dark secret. Her writings were filled with cryptic references to the other side and guardianship. One entry, in particular, caught my attention. She wrote of a hidden door in the cellar, a gateway to a place where the past and present merged, and where lost souls wandered. She warned of the dangers of opening the door, of the spirits that sought escape. One evening, as I read by the dim light of a flickering candle, the whispers grew louder. They seemed to be calling my name, beckoning me to the cellar. Summoning every ounce of courage, I descended the stairs, flashlight in hand. The air was thick with an oppressive chill, and the shadows seemed to dance around me. I approached the door, the whispers now almost deafening, and placed my hand on the cold wood. "Show yourself," I demanded, my voice trembling. The door creaked open on its own, revealing the same narrow passageway. This time, I noticed a faint, eerie glow emanating from the room at the end. Steeling myself, I stepped inside. The room was unchanged, the same circular walls, the same oppressive atmosphere. But now, ghostly figures flickered in and out of existence, their mournful eyes watching me with a mixture of sorrow and longing. "Why are you here?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. One of the figures stepped forward, its form more solid than the others. It was a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes filled with unspeakable pain. "We are trapped," she said, her voice echoing in the confined space. "Bound by the curse of this house. You must set us free." "How?" I asked, my heart pounding. "How can I help you?" She pointed to the book that had reappeared on the table. "Read the words," she said. "Break the seal. But be warned, once the seal is broken, there is no turning back." I approached the table, my hands shaking as I picked up the book. The symbols on the cover seemed to writhe and pulse under my touch. Taking a deep breath, I opened it and began to read the incantation inscribed within. The words were ancient and strange, and as I spoke them aloud, the room began to tremble. The figures grew more distinct, their forms solidifying. The walls of the room seemed to warp and twist, and a blinding light filled the space. I felt a surge of power, an energy coursing through me that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The spirits cried out in unison, their voices mingling with the whispers that now filled my mind. As I finished the incantation, the light intensified, and the room exploded with a force that knocked me to the ground. When I opened my eyes, the figures were gone, and the room was once again dark and silent. The book lay at my feet, its pages blank and lifeless. I staggered to my feet, my mind reeling from the experience. I made my way back up to the cellar, every step a struggle. The house was eerily silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. But as I reached the top of the stairs, I heard it, the sound of the doorknob turning once more insistent than ever. The whispers were back, louder and more desperate. The following night, the whispers turned into wails. I could no longer ignore the relentless turning of the doorknob. Each twist sent shivers down my spine, the sound resonating through the empty halls of the house. Sleep was a distant memory, replaced by the constant dread that something on the other side of that door was growing more impatient, more powerful. Desperation led me to seek help. I contacted an old friend, Miriam, who specialized in the occult. When she arrived, her eyes widened at the sight of the house. "This place is steeped in dark energy," she said, her voice low. "Whatever you did, it has awakened something ancient and angry." We descended into the cellar together, her presence providing a small comfort. She examined the door, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings. "These symbols are wards," she explained. "They were meant to keep something inside. By breaking the seal, you've unleashed it." Miriam set up a protective circle around the door, lighting candles and placing various talismans at the points. She began to chant softly, her words a soothing counterpoint to the increasingly frantic whispers. As her chant grew louder, the door began to shake, and a cold wind whipped through the cellar, extinguishing the candles one by one. "Miriam!" I shouted, panic rising in my chest. "Stay inside the circle," she yelled back, her voice strained. "Whatever happens, do not leave the circle." The door flew open with a thunderous crash, revealing a swirling vortex of darkness. Shadows spilled into the room, coalescing into the shape of a tall, imposing figure. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its presence filled the cellar with an overwhelming sense of malevolence. "Who dares to defy the ancient seal?" the figure intoned, its voice a deep, resonant echo. Miriam's chant faltered, and she fell to her knees, the strain of the ritual evident on her face. I stepped forward, driven by a mix of fear and determination. "It was me," I said, my voice shaking. "I released you. What do you want?" The figure's gaze fixed on me, its eyes burning into my soul. "Freedom," it hissed. "For centuries, we have been imprisoned in this wretched place, bound by the seal your ancestor created. You have broken the seal, but the price must be paid." "What price?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Your soul," it replied, a cruel smile spreading across its face. "In exchange for our freedom, you must take our place. Only then will we be released from this torment." "No!" Miriam cried, struggling to her feet. "There must be another way." The figure's smile widened. "There is no other way," it said. "The choice has been made." Before I could react, the shadows surged forward, enveloping me in their cold embrace. I felt my consciousness slipping away, my body growing numb. The last thing I saw was Miriam's anguished face, her desperate pleas echoing in my ears as the darkness consumed me. When I awoke, I was no longer in the cellar. I found myself in the same circular room, but it was now filled with a strange, ethereal light. The spirits were there, their forms solid and real. They looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "You have freed us," the woman said, stepping forward. "But now you are bound to this place." I looked down at my hands, seeing them fade and flicker like the spirits before me. I was no longer human, no longer alive. I was a part of the house now, a guardian of the seal. The door behind me closed with a final, resounding thud, and the whispers began anew. Story 6. The Mirror's Whisper. My parents always warned me not to talk to strangers, but they never warned me about the voices that talk back from the mirrors. I was 7 when I first heard it. We had just moved into the old Victorian house on the edge of town, a relic from another era with creaking floorboards and an unsettling silence that seemed to permeate every corner. My room was at the end of a long hallway, far from the warmth of the living room and the comforting hum of the kitchen. It was there, in the dim light of a single bulb, that I first encountered the voice. "Hello," it said, soft and almost melodic, like a whisper carried on a breeze. I froze, staring at my reflection in the old, ornate mirror that hung above my dresser. My parents had bought it at an estate sale, enchanted by its antique charm. The frame was intricately carved with twisted vines and small, haunting faces peering out from the wood. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The reflection didn't respond, but the voice continued, "Don't be afraid. I'm a friend." I remember my heart pounding in my chest, a mix of fear and curiosity keeping me rooted to the spot. The voice was strange, otherworldly, yet there was something oddly comforting about it. I didn't tell my parents about the voice. I didn't want them to think I was crazy, or worse, that we'd have to leave the house. Despite the eerie atmosphere, there was something captivating about it, like a dark fairy tale come to life. As days turned into weeks, the voice became a regular presence, always speaking to me when I was alone in my room. It knew things about me, secrets I had never shared with anyone. "I like your drawings," it would say. "You're very talented." One night, the voice was different. There was an urgency to it, a hint of desperation that sent chills down my spine. "You must help me," it pleaded. "I'm trapped here." I stepped closer to the mirror, peering into the depths of my reflection as if I could see through to the other side. "Trapped? How can I help you?" The voice hesitated, then whispered, "You must find the key. It's hidden in the house. Only you can set me free." My mind raced with questions, but the voice grew silent, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the growing sense of dread. The house seemed to take on a new, sinister energy, the shadows lengthening and the air growing colder. I knew I had to find the key, not just for the voice, but for myself. Something told me that our fates were intertwined, and that my life would never be the same if I failed. Hey, subscribe for more scary stories. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose and an underlying fear that gnawed at me. The voice hadn't spoken since the night before, but its words echoed in my mind. I had to find the key. As I descended the creaky staircase, my parents were already at the kitchen table, absorbed in their newspapers and coffee. They didn't notice the determined look on my face as I slipped past them and began my search. The house was vast, with countless nooks and crannies where the key could be hidden. I started in the attic, a place I had always avoided due to its eerie atmosphere. The attic was a chaotic mess of old furniture, dusty boxes, and forgotten relics. The light filtering through the small, grimy window did little to dispel the gloom. I rifled through the boxes, my heart pounding with every creak and groan of the old wooden floorboards. After hours of fruitless searching, I descended to the basement, another part of the house that seemed to exude a malevolent presence. The basement was cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of mildew. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and the single light bulb cast long, sinister shadows. I could feel the weight of the house pressing down on me, as if it were aware of my quest and determined to hinder me. Just as I was about to give up, I spotted an old trunk tucked away in a dark corner. Its surface was covered in dust, and the lock was rusty. With trembling hands, I pried it open, my breath catching as I saw what lay inside. Among the yellowed papers and faded photographs, there was a small, ornate key. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, with intricate engravings that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Clutching the key, I raced back to my room, my mind racing with questions. The voice had said the key would set it free, but I had no idea how to use it. As I stood before the mirror, the voice returned, sounding more urgent than ever. "You found it," it whispered, a note of relief in its tone. "Now, place the key in the lock." "But there's no lock," I protested, my eyes scanning the mirror for any sign of an opening. "Look closer," the voice urged. I leaned in, my breath fogging up the glass. As I wiped it away, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a small, almost imperceptible keyhole hidden among the carved vines on the frame. With trembling fingers, I inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and the room grew colder. My reflection blurred, replaced by a figure that seemed to emerge from the depths of the glass. It was a girl, about my age, with pale skin and wide, haunted eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice echoing in the room. "You've set me free." Before I could respond, the room was filled with a blinding light. I shielded my eyes, my heart racing as I felt a rush of icy air. When I opened them again, the girl was gone, and the mirror had returned to its normal, reflective state. I stood there, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. The voice had said it was trapped, but I never imagined it would be another child. I knew this was far from over. The girl might be free, but the house held many more secrets, and I had a feeling that releasing her was only the beginning. The atmosphere seemed to shift, growing darker and more oppressive. I could sense a presence watching me, waiting for the next move. Days passed, and the house felt different, charged with an unsettling energy that kept me on edge. The girl from the mirror haunted my thoughts, her wide, haunted eyes seared into my memory. I wondered who she was, how she had come to be trapped, and what it meant that I had freed her. The voice had been silent since her release, but the silence was heavy, filled with unspoken questions and lingering dread. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows crept across the walls, I heard a faint knock on my bedroom door. I opened it to find no one there, but a chill ran down my spine as I noticed a small, old-fashioned book lying on the floor. Its cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. I picked it up, curiosity overcoming my fear, and brought it to my desk. The book was a journal, its entries written in a delicate, flowing script. As I read, I realized it belonged to a girl named Eleanor, who had lived in the house many years ago. Her entries started innocently enough, detailing her daily life and her love for the old house. But as I delved deeper, the tone shifted, growing darker and more desperate. "I hear them," one entry read. "Whispers in the mirrors, calling to me. They say they need my help, but I'm afraid." Another entry, dated weeks later, was more frantic. "I found the key, just as they said. I turned it, and now they're free, but something is wrong. The house feels different. I think I've made a terrible mistake." My heart raced as I realized Eleanor had experienced the same thing I had. She had released the voices from the mirrors, but something had gone horribly wrong. The final entries were smudged and nearly illegible, but I could make out one chilling sentence: "I fear I have unleashed something I cannot control." I closed the journal, my mind reeling. The girl in the mirror, the voices, they weren't isolated incidents. They were part of something much larger, a darkness that had been awakened by Eleanor and now threatened to consume me as well. I needed answers, and there was only one place I could think to go. The old library in town was a relic in itself, filled with dusty tomes and ancient manuscripts. I spent hours combing through its musty shelves, searching for anything that could shed light on the history of the house and the entities trapped within its mirrors. My persistence paid off when I stumbled upon a book titled Haunted Reflections: The Curse of the Mirror Spirits. The book detailed a legend about spirits trapped in mirrors, bound by a powerful curse. It was said that these spirits could only be released by a special key, and once free, they would seek to possess the living, using their bodies to escape the mirror's confines permanently. The curse had been placed by a vengeful sorcerer, angered by the townsfolk who had wronged him. A cold dread settled over me as I realized the gravity of what I had done. By freeing the girl, I had unwittingly set in motion a chain of events that could lead to my own possession. I had to find a way to reverse the curse, to put the spirits back where they belonged before it was too late. Armed with this new knowledge, I returned home, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. As I entered my room, I noticed the mirror had changed. Its surface was no longer reflective but dark, almost like a portal to another world. I could feel the presence of the spirits, their malevolent energy seeping into the room. A whisper echoed through the silence, chilling me to the bone. "You can't escape us," it hissed. "We are part of you now." My resolve hardened. I would find a way to stop them, to break the curse and save myself. But deep down, I knew it would come at a cost. The darkness was closing in, and time was running out. Determined to end the curse, I knew I had to confront the spirits head-on. The key had released them, but there must be a way to bind them back to the mirrors. The old book from the library mentioned a counterspell, a ritual that could trap the spirits again, but it required a sacrifice, a part of myself willingly given to seal the mirrors once more. The thought terrified me, but I had no other choice. That night, as the house settled into its usual eerie silence, I gathered the items needed for the ritual: candles, salt, and the key. The instructions were clear: draw a circle of salt around the mirror, light the candles at each cardinal point, and use the key to focus my intent. I felt a heavy sense of foreboding as I prepared the room, the shadows dancing on the walls like sinister specters. With everything in place, I stood before the mirror, the key in my hand. The surface was still dark, an abyss that seemed to reach out and pull at my soul. Taking a deep breath, I began the incantation, my voice shaking but growing stronger with each word. Spirits bound by the mirror's curse, I call upon the power to reverse. Return to your prison, relinquish your hold, by this key and my sacrifice, be controlled. As I spoke, the air grew colder, and the candles flickered violently. The mirror's surface rippled, and the whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices pleading and threatening all at once. "You can't do this," one voice cried. "We will never be bound again." But I pressed on, my resolve unwavering. The final words of the incantation required a pledge, a willing offer of something precious. "In exchange for your imprisonment, I give a part of my soul," I declared, holding the key aloft. A sharp pain shot through me, as if a piece of my very essence was being torn away. The mirror's surface glowed with an ethereal light, and I could see the spirits, their faces twisted in rage and desperation, being drawn back into the glass. The room shook, and I fell to my knees, the pain almost unbearable. The key grew hot in my hand, burning with a white-hot intensity. But I held on, focusing all my will on sealing the spirits away. Slowly, the voices faded, and the mirror returned to its reflective state, the malevolent presence dissipating. Exhausted, I slumped to the floor, the key clattering beside me. The air was still and cold, but the oppressive darkness had lifted. I had done it, I had trapped the spirits once more. But I knew there would be a price to pay for my actions. The part of my soul I had sacrificed left me feeling empty, a hollow ache that would never fully heal. As I lay there, the house seemed to sigh with relief, the old walls settling into a peaceful silence. My parents never knew the full extent of what had happened, and I decided it was best that way. They continued with their lives, blissfully unaware of the darkness that had nearly consumed us all. In the days that followed, I tried to move on, but the mirror haunted me. I could feel the spirits' lingering presence, their hatred and malice a constant shadow. I had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The mirror remained, a silent sentinel guarding its imprisoned souls, and I knew I would always be tied to it. One evening, as the sun set and the house was bathed in the warm glow of twilight, I heard the voice again, faint and distant. "We will return," it whispered. "And next time, you won't be able to stop us." A shiver ran down my spine, but I steeled myself, determined to be ready for whatever came next. The mirror was quiet now, but I knew it was only a matter of time before the spirits tried to break free again. I had faced the darkness and survived, but the shadows were always there, waiting. My parents always warned me not to talk to strangers, but they never warned me about the voices that talk back from the mirrors, a lesson I would never forget. Story 7. The Floating Terror. From as early as I can remember, I had dreams of flying. As a child, these dreams were a source of joy and freedom, an escape from the mundane. I would soar through the skies, the wind whipping through my hair, feeling invincible. My parents used to smile when I recounted my nightly adventures. They'd say I had the soul of an explorer, destined for great things. Little did they know, those dreams would morph into something far more sinister. I first noticed the change in my mid-20s. No longer a child, I was living alone in a creaky old apartment on the outskirts of town. The place had character, or so I told myself when I signed the lease. High ceilings, large windows, and a history that seemed to seep from the very walls. The neighbors were few and far between, and those who did live nearby kept to themselves. It was perfect for an introvert like me, or so I thought. The dreams began to twist and warp. Instead of joyous flights over fields and oceans, I found myself floating upwards within my apartment. The once comforting sensation of weightlessness now filled me with dread. I would drift towards the ceiling, the world below growing distant and alien. Waking up would always be a relief, but the unease lingered long after I had returned to solid ground. One night, everything changed. I awoke in the dead of night, the room bathed in the cold light of a full moon. I couldn't move. Sleep paralysis, I thought, having experienced it once or twice before. But this was different. My body felt weightless, and as I tried to blink the sleep from my eyes, I realized I was floating. Not dreaming, not imagining. Truly floating. My heart pounded in my chest, the sound deafening in the stillness. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. Panic surged through me as I rose higher, my face mere inches from the cracked plaster of the ceiling. The air around me felt charged, like the calm before a storm. A whispering sound filled the room, incomprehensible yet undeniably there. The words, if they were words, seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The floating episodes became more frequent. They would last longer, often until the first light of dawn. I stopped sleeping, too terrified to close my eyes. Work suffered, friends noticed my haggard appearance, but how could I explain what was happening? I float to the ceiling every night, I'd say. I hear voices in the dark. I would have been committed. One evening, after an especially long and grueling day, I collapsed onto my bed, exhaustion overtaking fear. As I drifted off, I felt the familiar sensation of weightlessness. This time, however, something was different. The whispers were louder, clearer. Come, they beckoned. Join us. I tried to resist, to fight against the invisible force pulling me upwards, but it was futile. The ceiling loomed closer, the air grew colder, and the whispers became a cacophony of desperate voices. In that moment, I understood. These were the voices of the lost, those who had floated up before me and never returned. I was joining them, becoming part of whatever haunted this place. As I hovered against the ceiling, the last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was my own reflection in the window, eyes wide with terror, silently screaming for a salvation that would never come. My days and nights blurred into one long, unending nightmare. Each night, the invisible force would pull me from my bed, and I'd find myself pressed against the ceiling, helpless and terrified. The whispers grew more coherent, their messages more insistent. Remember, they would say. Remember what you've forgotten. But what could I possibly have forgotten that would tether me to this haunting experience? I began to dig into the history of my apartment building. It was an old place, with layers of stories etched into its very foundation. The local library became my second home as I pored over old newspapers and records. What I found was a string of mysterious disappearances, dating back to the building's construction. Tenants would move in, and within months, they were simply gone. No bodies, no clues, just vanished into thin air. One name stood out among the records: Eliza Crawford. She had lived in my apartment nearly 50 years ago and was the first recorded disappearance. The more I read about her, the more I felt an inexplicable connection. She had been an artist, a dreamer, much like myself. Her friends described her as whimsical and free-spirited until the dreams started. The flying dreams. Determined to find answers, I tracked down one of the few remaining people who had known Eliza, an old woman named Margaret who lived in a retirement home nearby. Margaret's room was filled with paintings, many of which I recognized from the descriptions of Eliza's work. As I explained my situation, Margaret's eyes filled with a mix of fear and sadness. "You must leave that place," she said, her voice trembling. "Eliza was my best friend. We used to laugh about her flying dreams, but they turned dark. She became obsessed with finding out what they meant. One night, she confided in me that she thought the building was alive, that it fed on the dreams and fears of its residents." Margaret handed me a small, tattered journal. This was Eliza's. She gave it to me the night before she disappeared. She said it held the key to understanding everything, but I was too scared to read it. I thanked Margaret and left, clutching the journal like a lifeline. Back in my apartment, I opened it to the first page. Eliza's handwriting was elegant, flowing across the pages with a mix of sketches and notes. She described her dreams in vivid detail, eerily similar to my own experiences. As I read on, her entries became more frantic, more desperate. She wrote of shadows that moved on their own, of whispers that grew louder each night. One entry stood out, dated the night before her disappearance: "The building wants us. It takes our dreams, our fears, and consumes us. I believe the only way to break free is to confront it, to understand its hunger. Tonight, I will face it. If I do not return, let this be my warning to whoever finds it." I knew what I had to do, but the fear was paralyzing. That night, as the familiar weightlessness took over, I clutched Eliza's journal and let the force pull me upwards. The ceiling seemed to ripple, and I passed through it into a dark, cavernous space filled with shadows and whispers. Faces floated around me, eyes hollow and desperate. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the cacophony. The faces turned towards me, and the whispers ceased. One face, more distinct than the others, moved closer. It was Eliza. "We are the lost," she said, her voice echoing in the void. "We are those who came before, those who sought answers and became part of the hunger. But you can break the cycle. You must find the heart of the building and confront it. Only then can we be free." Eliza's words haunted me, even more than the nightly flights to the ceiling. The idea that the building itself was sentient, feeding off its residents, seemed absurd and yet perfectly explained my experiences. I had to find the heart of the building, the source of its malevolent power. Armed with Eliza's journal, I began to search. The next day, I combed through every corner of my apartment, searching for hidden doors, loose floorboards, anything that might lead me to the heart. Hours passed with no success. Frustration mounted, but I couldn't give up. I was determined to end this nightmare, for myself and for those who had vanished before me. That evening, as the shadows lengthened and the whispers began anew, I had an epiphany. The basement. In all my time living here, I had never ventured down to the basement. It was locked, and the key had long been lost. But if the heart of the building existed, it would be somewhere hidden, somewhere rarely disturbed. I managed to pick the lock with a bobby pin, my hands shaking with a mix of fear and excitement. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air was heavy with dust and the scent of decay. Each step down felt like a step closer to something ancient and powerful. At the bottom, the basement was a maze of old furniture, cobwebs, and forgotten relics. I navigated through the clutter, guided by an unseen force. In the center of the room, hidden beneath a rotting carpet, was a trapdoor. My heart raced as I pried it open, revealing a narrow tunnel leading even deeper into the building's foundation. Torch in hand, I descended into the tunnel. The walls were lined with old, crumbling bricks, and the air grew colder with each step. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. They seemed to be guiding me, urging me forward. I reached the end of the tunnel, which opened into a large, cavernous chamber. In the center of the chamber stood an ancient, twisted tree. Its roots dug deep into the earth, and its branches reached up, almost touching the ceiling. The air around it pulsed with an otherworldly energy. This was it. The heart of the building. The source of its hunger. I approached the tree, my torch flickering in the dark. As I got closer, I saw faces in the bark, twisted in agony. The lost souls, trapped and consumed. My heart ached for them, for Eliza. I placed a hand on the tree, and the whispers surged into a scream. The faces turned towards me, their eyes pleading. "You must destroy it," Eliza's voice echoed in my mind. "Break the cycle." I searched for a way to destroy the tree. My torch wouldn't be enough, I needed something more. Suddenly, I remembered Eliza's journal. Flipping through the pages, I found a sketch of the tree with a series of symbols and instructions. It was a ritual, a way to sever the connection and free the trapped souls. Gathering my resolve, I followed the instructions. I carved the symbols into the bark, each cut causing the tree to shudder and the whispers to wail. As I completed the final symbol, the tree began to tremble violently. The faces in the bark screamed, a chorus of agony and hope. The chamber filled with a blinding light, and the ground shook. The tree's branches flailed, and the roots began to pull free from the earth. I stumbled back, shielding my eyes from the light. When it finally faded, the tree was gone. In its place was a gaping hole, and the chamber was silent. I stood there, panting, waiting for something to happen. Slowly, the air warmed, and the oppressive feeling lifted. I had done it. The heart was destroyed. The building was no longer hungry. As I made my way back up the tunnel, the whispers were gone. The basement, once a place of dread, felt empty and lifeless. Climbing the stairs back to my apartment, I felt a strange sense of peace. I knew it was over. The nightmare was finally over. Or so I thought. Leave your favorite color in the comments if you've made it this far. The end. Thanks for watching.